Howdy, and welcome to the Breakaway podcast. Thanks for listening. Breakaway is a Bible study that meets on the campus of Texas A&M. For more information on Breakaway, please visit breakawayministries.org. We hope you enjoy the talk.
It's Ephesians 5:22 through 33. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands.
Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband.
Well, we're talking about marriage tonight, which brings up the obvious question. Why are you talking about marriage to a bunch of single people? I'll tell you why. I'll give you three reasons. Number one is that you want to be married. Amen. There is an ongoing study at the University of Michigan of graduating high school seniors, and in 2013, 78% of high school senior girls and 70% of high school senior boys said that having a healthy marriage was extremely important to them. Those are the same percentages that have been true since the 1970s. So some people have said, well, I don't know if millennials desire to be married. Oh, yes, you do, as much as they did back in the day when they were wearing bell bottoms. You want to be married. Your generation tends to get married later because there's some fear attached to marriage, but you want to get married. And here's the other thing, is that most of you will get married and will get married within the next 10 years. The majority of people who get married every year are somewhere in their 20s. So there's a high probability that you're going to get married soon, right? Some of you are saying, come, Lord Jesus. Well, it might. Third reason we're talking about it is because in our country, we don't know how to be married well. I mean, anybody can get married, you know? Anybody can get a date and get a wife and get a husband. You set your standards low enough and you can get married tomorrow, right? But you look around and there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of hurt from people that are entering into what is supposed to be one of the most joyous of bonds we've been given, and there's a lot of hurt. The best statistics we have say around 40% of marriages in our country end in divorce. About 40%. And that hurts us. And so we need to come at this and go, man, how do we do it? How do we enter into marriage? If we want it, if there's a good chance we're going to do it, how do we enter into it well? And to answer that question, we need to look at created intent. We don't need to look at ourselves and go, what do I think would be good for marriage for me? That's like me asking my 2-year-old daughter what she thinks would be nutritional for her. She doesn't know. Today she thought ice cream was medicine. She has no idea what's good for her growth and development, and demonstrably neither do we when it comes to marriage. So much of the philosophies of how marriage should work in our country are demonstrably not working. So we need to go back to created intent. What did our Maker intend when he gave us marriage? What's marriage for, and how do we do it well? And as you look in this passage, Ephesians 5, which is sort of the Mount Everest of passages on marriage, he quotes Genesis 2. He takes you back to show you that marriage was designed by God. And he quotes it back in the garden. It was given by God. In Genesis chapter 1 and 2, God is creating the world, and 7 times as he's fashioning the planet, he says, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good. And then in Genesis 2, you get your first not good. He says it's not good for man to be alone. Now, Adam had the animals, but I don't think I have to belabor the point that there's a big difference between watching a sunset with a beautiful woman and watching it with a dog, right? And so God looks and says, this man is meant not to just be a cul-de-sac for my love and grace. He's meant to be a conduit of it into other relationships, right? And so God created woman, right? And he brought along a woman that man could enjoy, right? And so God designed an institution. He says, I will make a helper suitable for him. That means one that fits with him. What 1 Peter calls a fellow heir in the grace of life. He says, I'm going to give this man someone who's like him and yet different. Men and women are different, and yet they're different in a way that's made to fit together. Physically, obviously, but also spiritually and emotionally. God created male and female to fit together in a way that is designed by God for the delight of humanity. It's a good thing. When Adam sees Eve, he just breaks out into poetry. He says, I am Ish, she is Isha. I am man, she is whoa, man, right? It's a good thing, right? It's a gift from God, right? And so God developed marriage for our good. He designed it. And let me tell you something, when we use it according to his design, it works. And so it's interesting where we are in the book of Ephesians. We've been talking through Ephesians 1 through 3 are about all that God has done in Christ to save us from sin, make us alive, make us who we're meant to be under God as men and women. And then in Ephesians 4 through 5, he's talking to us about how to walk as people who know God. And the last walk we looked at is in chapter 5, where he says, let's walk not as unwise, but as wise. Wisdom is knowing how the world works and working well within it. And he says, we want to walk as people who are wise, who understand how God made the world and understand how to navigate it well. And he says, don't be foolish, understand what the will of the Lord is. And you go, what is it, Paul? He says, don't get drunk with wine, that's debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit of God. A wise life is one where you're filled with the very Spirit of God. And then he walks through 5 participles of what happens when you're filled with the Spirit of God, that we'll address one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. We'll speak kindly to each other. We'll sing and make melody with our heart to the Lord. We'll give thanks to the Lord. And then it says, and we'll submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, wives to their husbands. And so he moves naturally into this husband and wife section from talking about here's how to live a wise life. Here's how to live a spirit-filled life. A wise, godly life will lead to a healthy, happy marriage, right? And it's interesting, you hear people quote all the time, well, don't Christians get divorced as much as non-Christians do? Well, W. Bradley Wilcox is a leading sociologist at the University of Virginia. And he's been testing that theory by doing a number of surveys. And this is what he found, that what he calls active conservative Protestants. That is active in that they're involved in their church, they're involved in serving, they're involved in their faith. Conservative, not meaning so much politically, but conservative in that they believe the Bible is the Word of God. They want to understand it. Protestants, they believe they're saved by the grace of God through faith. Active conservative Protestants get divorced 35% less than their counterparts. That people who walk according to the Word of God find that marriage works. It's designed by God. He knows how it works. But it's not just designed by God. It's meant to display God. And that's what's fascinating about this text. Paul will quote Genesis chapter 2, that God took the two, male and female, and made them one flesh. And then he says, this is a mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. And when Paul says mystery, he doesn't mean something that's confusing or hard to understand. He means something that was previously hidden and is now revealed. And what's revealed is, he says, this unity of diversity of male and female is meant to be a testimony to the world about God. That God has designed marriage to display something about himself. That when a man and woman come together, it's a mystery. It's showing people the nature of how Jesus Christ, the Son of God, wants to come together with his people, the church, right? Because the reality is, Christianity is not just about morality, and it's not just about forgiveness. It's about love, forgiving of sin to get it out of the way, so that God can move in and be bound together with us in a loving relationship. And what God says is that God has come to bind himself to us in covenantal love. That's the joy of the Christian. I'm bound together with God, and he's promised never to leave me and forsake me. And then God says, and I gave you this institution called marriage to be a shining picture of what the love of God and his people looks like. That when you enter into marriage, it's not just for your delight, it's also to display the glory of God, of Christ's love for his church. So as a Christian, that's what's so powerful entering into marriage, is you say, I get to enjoy this person, but our story gets to also tell a bigger story. It gets to show the world the love of God and the way the man loves the wife. And it shows the world how the people of God respond to God and the way the wife loves the husband. You see it? Now, so you go, okay, Ben, if marriage was designed by God to display God, that's what it's for, how do we do it? Well, that's where we get into our text. And he'll tell the woman, take your cues from the church. And the man, take your cues from Christ. What does that look like? Let's start with the women. Verse 22, wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. Oh, what a fun verb. Submit, right? Everybody's favorite word. What do you want to do today? I don't know, submit. Let's talk about what that means, because I sat around with a group of students the other day and I said, when you hear the word submit, what do you think? And all the adjectives they used to explain it were intensely negative. So we're like, I understand that. Let's talk about what is this passage saying, and let's talk about what it's not saying. When it says, wives, submit to your husbands, submission doesn't mean subjugation. There's never a command for one human being to force another to submit in the Bible. Did you know that? There's no active command for one person to submit another. And you won't see in here where it says, hey, husband, you get that woman to submit, son. It doesn't say that. It's always used in a middle tense. And what middle tense means is that you submit yourself. It's a decision a woman makes. This is a verse for the woman, that she chooses to do this, right? And so it's not subjugation, and it's not servitude. That's not what this means. This doesn't mean you're a second-class citizen and you just kind of do whatever he says and scrub his floors. That's not what that means, right? Jesus was the leader of the disciples, and he would serve, right? And so leaders can serve, servants can lead. To submit doesn't mean that I just make myself something less. That's not what it means. So you go, what does the word mean? Well, let me give you the official definition. It means to order yourself under another, right? The verb submit carries the idea of subordination of one in an ordered array beneath another who has authority, right? And you see it later in the text when it says the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of a church. The man's put in a position of authority. And you go, what does that mean? Well, Ben, help me with that. To submit means to recognize and respond. To submit means I recognize. I recognize that God has ordered the world in a certain way. And that as God has ordered the world, he has put some authority structures in place, right? And as he's done that, this word submit, it's used several times to talk about soldiers who come underneath someone who's in a superior rank. It's not about worth, it's not about value, it's not about equality, it's about organizational structure. That someone's given the responsibility that someone else comes under. So Jesus, in Luke chapter 2, submits to his parents. Was Jesus a second-class citizen? Had less value, less abilities than his parents? No, he was Jesus Christ. And yet he understood that God has ordained that parents have a level of authority over children, and so Jesus willfully submitted himself to that, right? It's about organizational structure. So I recognize, as a wife, God has given certain responsibilities to a man to look out for a woman. And I recognize that. I see that as something God will hold him accountable to. So I put myself underneath him. And you go, what does put underneath mean? Just hold on. It means to recognize and to respond to the leadership God has given the husband. And you go, what does responding to male leadership look like? I would say this: submission for a wife is an inclination to receive and affirm your husband's leadership. That's what I would say a wife's submission is. It's an inclination to receive and affirm a husband's leadership. And let me walk you through that. I say an inclination to receive leadership. That doesn't mean that a woman never initiates something. Some people think that, well, if a woman submits, I just have to sit there and never voice my opinions, never share my thoughts, never give an idea. I just have to wait for him to come up with one. And even if I have a good idea that's obvious to everyone but him, I just have to sit there and wait for him to figure it out. No! You can talk, say, initiate, you can do that kind of stuff, but what it says to submit here, it's to realize God's gonna hold this man accountable for how he treats me and how he treats our family. And so whenever he chooses to initiate, whenever he chooses to lead, I wanna receive that, I wanna hear that, and I wanna affirm that, right? That whenever a man chooses to step in to initiate for the family, and we'll talk about the guy in a minute, that I wanna receive what he's saying, and I wanna affirm when he does that. And let me tell you something about this. As much as we kind of avoid that word submission, a man who will initiate, so many women I talk to, you want this. You want a guy who will initiate, right? I hear that all the time. And if you don't believe me, just put it in this context, in dating. Who would you rather go on a date with? A guy that asks you out, and then when you get in the car goes, I don't know, so what do you want to do? Or would you rather go on a date with a guy that asked you out, and when you get in the car, he says, okay, I've picked 2 incredible restaurants. One of them is kind of a seafood thing, all right? The other one is sort of an Italian, dim lights, romantic, whatever. I don't know what you were in the mood for, so I kind of narrowed it down to 2 places that are pretty amazing. What are you feeling, huh? That is good leadership. That's him initiating, right? Who would you rather go on a date with? I'm guessing you're clapping for this guy, right? Or maybe he just says, hey, I got a date planned out, buckle up, it's gonna be amazing, right? Or maybe he says, hey, if you could have a great experience someday, what are some of the things you love to do? And then he hears them from you and says, okay, I'm gonna set something up and I'll get back to you. A guy that's initiating, right? You want a guy like that. I talk to so many women and they want a guy that initiates. I don't know any woman that would hear that and be like, oh, 2 options? You trying to press me? You trying to hold me down? Sick of this. I mean, does that feel like subjugation? No, it feels like freedom. It feels like freedom, doesn't it? You want a guy that's initiating. And you want a guy that initiates and carries a sense of responsibility for his family. What's the great grievance over men in our country? Men that don't feel responsibility for the family, so they just leave. So much of the crime, so much of the pain, so much of the hurt, so many of the societal problems in our country come from where? Men that leave. Men that leave their families. You want a man that feels a sense of responsibility under God to care for that family, that he feels that God's gonna hold me accountable for how I treat this woman and child. You want a guy that feels that, and when he feels that, and then you wanna say, hey, I affirm that. And so when he says, hey, I think we should go to church, you go, yes, okay. When he says, hey, I'm kind of thinking we should visit these, what do you think? You'd say, that's a great idea. Thank you for doing that. I love when you do that. I love that you've set up these times. You receive his leadership and affirm it. Yes, that's awesome. You do it. Let me let you in on a secret, ladies. A lot of men, their biggest fear is to lead. Because the reality is, if you don't follow, he's just taking a walk. And it's embarrassing. And so when a guy steps out there and initiates something, it's a vulnerable place to be. And when you affirm that, when you celebrate that, you breathe life into him, right? And so that's a beautiful thing for a woman to do, right? And let me tell you something, submission is something you're gonna do at a job anyway. It's the same word used in the New Testament to talk about bosses, right? And so some people go, well, I'm so scared of the word submission because it sounds like the destruction of my dreams and crushing of my goals and the robbing of my identity. Would you work at a company like that? Do you have a boss that's doing that? If you had a boss that wanted to do that to you, that's a bad boss. If you're interviewing with a guy and he says, yeah, if you come to this company, I'm gonna try to strip you of identity and really rob you of any worth you have inside, you'd be like, I don't wanna work here. Don't submit to that boss. But if you have a company with a great boss that says, hey, I wanna give you training that helps you flourish and helps you do what you're built to do, man, I wanna give you resources to accomplish some goals. I'm gonna take the heavy lifting of trying to figure out some of the organizational structural issues to free you up to do what you're passionate about. You're not gonna go, how dare you? Try to be the boss of me. He's your boss. And if you come into a job and you understand that person has a responsibility and he has to answer to somebody, and I have responsibilities and I have to answer for how I treat myself, it's something okay to enter into. And man, I'll tell you what, when I got a job out of college, I went to work for a guy at a church that anytime I walked into him, his main deal was how do I set Ben up to succeed? Anytime I met with him in a meeting, it was what counsel do I need to give him, what advice, what funding, what do I need to do to help Ben succeed in this? And I'll tell you something, I loved working for that man. I loved submitting to that man. It was freedom for me to be under a leader like that. It did not feel like oppression. And so if having a leader feels like oppression, pick the right leader, right? Get the right guy, right? And so that's what very careful in this season of your life is, are you following the right guy? Well, no, let me say it that way because let me say this. Who are you meant to submit to? Notice it says submit to your own husbands. Wives are to submit to their husbands. This is about the relationship of a covenant of a man and woman, right? There is a huge gap between husband, a guy who's made a covenant before God to a woman, and boyfriend. This relationship can end in a minute. This one would have to go through lawyers and all that kind of stuff. There is a huge gap of commitment, of covenant, of thousands of dollars, of time, of Almighty God. Huge difference. So any guy that's like, it's basically like we're married, it's basically like you don't have a clue what you're saying. You could end this in an afternoon and the whole thing's liquidated. This is a covenant until death do us part under God, right? It's different. And so you don't have to, if you start dating a guy, go, well, I have to submit to him. He wanted me to read this book for my quiet time and not that one. He's not the boss of you. You live your life under God. You don't belong to that guy yet. And he lives his life under God, and as God brings y'all's lives together, then you can decide, do I commit to this guy? But before you jump into that commitment, you understand, if we commit, my spiritual life is now intimately bound up with his forever. Wives, submit to your husband as to the Lord. That means I submit to him in the same way as to the Lord, which is a pretty big statement, and I submit to him as a function of submitting to the Lord. Your spiritual life under God is now forever bound up with this person, so make a good choice. It's not flippant to go into marriage. I'm moving with this guy because this is an institution ordained by God that I have a reverence for. The husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Now, some people go, in everything? What if he's doing this or that, something's illegal? Well, yes, there are caveats that if he's just going off like, hey, let's go kill some people, you don't violate the commands of God. But the reality is, we're so quick to move to the caveats and not catch the big weight of that. That you come under him in everything. That's big. And so you pick the right guy. You pick the right guy, right? So now I say that, and you go, okay, there's more I could say. You might have some questions. Come ask me later. You can tweet us. We're doing the podcast, but let's move on to the boys, right? Because here's the reality. There are 41 words to instruct the wife. There's 116 to educate the men, right? Buckle up. So wives, you're meant to submit to the guy. Great, that sounds wonderful. I'm excited to do that. Well, let's talk about what kind of guy. Verse 25. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Husbands are called to love their wives. That word love is the word in Greek agape. It's not the word eros. Eros is passionate romantic love. They can get stirred up in a moment of, I love you so much. And that's the love that when people get married in our culture today, they go, I don't know, we fell out of love. You're like, you fell out of passion because passion rises and falls. You don't fall out of agape. That is a binding covenantal love under God that says, I'm not going anywhere. And the husband commits to do that, and it's present tense. He always does it and never stops. The husband loves his wife. How does he do it? As Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. You love your wife as much as Christ loved his church. And you go, how did Christ love his church? Well, it tells you, and gave himself up for her. That word gave himself up, it's in the aorist form. The aorist means it was a moment in time. It doesn't mean the way he gave up his life all through his life. It's talking about one specific moment. It's aiming you at the cross. It's saying, gentlemen, do you want to know how you're supposed to treat your wife? Look at Jesus Christ on the cross. What did he do on that cross? Jesus Christ was willing to sacrifice everything down to the very last drop of his blood to make her fully alive as who she's meant to be under God. That's what Jesus did for his church. What do I need to do to make the church all that she is meant to be under God? Whatever it costs me, I will do that. Ladies, I promise you, it will be easy to follow a man who takes his cues from a God like that. That says, my job is to initiate and sacrifice so that you flourish under God. That's what a man does. Look at how Christ gave. He initiated. We weren't begging for him to come, but he came because he knew it was good. And where was the church's condition when he came? Was the church looking attractive, beautiful? No, the church was rejecting him. People that would be a part of Jesus' church, that were going to come to know Jesus later, were people that were in the very act of driving nails into his hands. Jesus loved his people on their absolute worst day while they were treating Jesus like a joke and an enemy, right? How does a man love his wife? You're willing to sacrifice anything for her, even on her worst day when you get nothing back. That's how a man loves his wife. That I will initiate to move towards her and sacrifice whatever I need to sacrifice. And look at why he did it for us. That he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and blameless. Jesus initiated, he moved towards us. He sacrificed, gave everything to protect, to move sin out of the way. That's what sanctify means. That he's going to wash her clean. All the broken things and sad things, he's pushing them out of the way. He's taking the hit for sin for her so that she might be clean and pure. He protects. And not only does he protect, he provides. Verse 28, in the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but he nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we're members of his body. It says, you take care of your wife like you take care of your body. You feed it, care for it, make sure it's functioning. And he says, and you do that like you would take care of your own body, and you also do it because she is your body. If the man's the head of the wife, the woman's the body of the man. And Jesus gave his life for the body, the church. That's the metaphor the Bible uses. And a man will give everything for his wife, to care for her, and to nourish and cherish. That is to provide all she needs to be holy under God. Do you see it? Jesus initiated and sacrificed to make us, the church, fully who we were meant to be under God. Right? And that's what a man does. Men initiate. We initiate in love, right? And we sacrifice so she can be alive under God. I think you see it clearly in the book of Genesis. In the book of Genesis, Genesis 1 starts in a negative state. It says the earth was formless and the earth was void. Formless means it had no structure. Void means there was no fullness. It would literally be like saying there was no flower and no vase, right? If you had a flower in a vase, it would say the world was formless and void. There was no fullness, no flower, because there was no vase, no form. Right? And yet in Genesis chapter 1, you see God initiating on the chaos. He moves towards the world. And in the Genesis chapter 1, in days 1, 2, and 3, you see God create sea, air, and land. He creates the static life support systems of the world. Right? And then in days 4, 5, and 6, he fills them with life, fish and birds and animals. God creates structure, and it's structure that's not rigid, it's structure that promotes life. You see that? And then when God creates Adam, he tells Adam, cultivate the ground. He tells Adam to be godlike. What is cultivating? It's to take something and create an environment where that thing can reach its maximum flourishing. That's what a man does. A man says, I will initiate and I will sacrifice to create an environment where my wife flourishes under God. That's what a man does. That's how you enter marriage. And so you initiate. You initiate romance. You plan dates. And some guys, I remember when I was single going, oh, that's easy, I'll plan dates. It's amazing how simple it becomes when you get married to just get into the routine. You come home from work, how was work? Exhausting, sit on the couch, wash over me TV, right? And then you go to bed when you're tired, wake up, do it again, and you become roommates. The man has to initiate, get off the couch, son. Take her to a restaurant, one without TVs, so I can listen with my face, right? And you initiate romance with her. Right? You initiate communication with her. I remember I had a seminary prof say 2 things to married men. He said, keep the flowers fresh. And I said, you mean stay romantic? Was that a metaphor for staying romantic? And he goes, no, I mean, literally, I buy her flowers every single week. I'm like, wow, okay. I still sort of see it metaphorically, of initiate communication, of encouragement, of breathing life. And then he said, and you never go to bed if you sense something's wrong with your girl. He says, you don't go to sleep. And so he told us, pray with your wife before you go to bed. He said, pray together. Because it's hard to pray mad, right? It's hard to be like, Lord, I just pray you would smite her in her sin. You're like, it's going to bring up issues. So he said, initiate communication. Initiate spiritual leadership. That you say, I'm going to take us to church. I'm going to mobilize us. And you sacrifice, right? And you sacrifice for what's best for her under God. So many men go, oh, the man's supposed to be the leader? Great. And you know where we lead our wives? To the place that's best for us. So we go, sorry, we got to make a budget. And the budget always has space for the stuff you like and not the stuff she likes, right? Well, we have to have a 55-inch TV. Why are you spending that much money on clothes? We need to be good stewards under God. Like, really? Think about it for a second. You take your finances, you take your money, you take your time, and you sacrifice so she flourishes under God, right? That's what you do as a man. Jesus looked at us and says, what do we need under God? We need forgiveness, I'm going to forgive them. They need the words of God, I'm going to speak them. They need my death to take away sin, I'm dying. They need to rise from the grave to beat death, I'm beating it. They need the Spirit of God to animate them, I'm breathing it into them. Jesus was watching us and saw what we need, and he provided it richly. That's what a husband does, to provide for his wife under God. What helps her come alive? Is it time alone with the Word of God to study? How do I create that space? How do I give her time to leave the house? If a dirty house is confusing for her and she can't focus, I clean the house. Are there certain activities that make her come alive under God? I fund those. Right? I remember for me as a husband, I thought men had to build the furniture in the house, right? Because I was like, that's what a man does, he builds, right? And I'm sitting there with like a desk from IKEA. And I'm just doing it out of discipline because I hate building stuff. I hate work with my hands. And I'm sitting there, and I'll never forget the first year of marriage, I would start building things, and my wife would always kind of watch me, and then she'd sort of walk over and kind of start looking at the instructions, and then kind of start grabbing things, and then start taking things out of my hands. And initially, I got really offended. I was like, you think I can't build desks? Like, you think you married like some kind of emasculated freak or something? Like, what are you doing? Like, you're real frustrated. But then I watched her over time, and I realized if you gave me 2 hours, I want to read a book. You give her 2 hours, she's always wanting to build stuff with her hands. And I'm realizing my wife loves to build things, that a way to love her is to let her build them. And so we talked about that, and she loves that. And so one of my gifts to my wife was a bunch of lumber, and she built a picnic table in the backyard, right? Even today, she was like, I think I'm going to go buy some seeds and plant flowers. And I'm like, I would never do that. But she loves that. So guess what? I'm going to fund it. I'm going to do whatever I got to do, create whatever space I need to create. If she needs time away from the kids, we're going to pay for a babysitter, right? If she needs time to go meet with her accountability group, women that breathe life into her, I'll stay home with the kids. I'm going to sacrifice whatever time, energy I need to sacrifice so that she's fully her under God. Wayne Grudem, the guy who literally wrote the book on biblical manhood and womanhood, called Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. Successful seminary professor. A lot of the big, most prestigious, most well-known seminaries are on the East Coast. He took his wife to a speaking engagement in Phoenix, Arizona. Nothing really in that educational world happening out there, right? But he saw that the dry air helped her health. So you know what he did? He moved to Phoenix Seminary, because that's how you love your wife. You initiate and sacrifice so she can be fully alive under God. Not to satisfy every whim and to be prisoner to her little wants and desires, but you go, what will make her flourish under God? Let me sacrifice to do that. Christ didn't become our little servant doing whatever we ask him to do. Christ was always a man and always a leader, but he was a man who was strong enough to be undaunted as thousands of demons rose up. What's your name? Legion? Beat it. He was unafraid. But he was tender enough to weep with a sister who lost her brother, and tender enough to sit and call children to sit in his lap. And he's tender enough to come to you and say, what are your needs? I'll provide you. I'll care for you. I'll provide what's best for you under God. That's what Jesus did for us. A husband feels a sense of responsibility because he is responsible under God to initiate and to sacrifice, to protect and provide for his wife so she can flourish under God. And a wife has an inclination to receive that leadership and to affirm it so that that man can be fully who he's meant to be under God. Do you see it? And as we do that, as the man initiates and leads in a way that breathes life into his wife, and as she responds and affirms him, The world sees that, and let me tell you something. When the world sees a marriage like that, they're dumbfounded by it. Most people enter into a contractual agreement where they're just trying to get theirs. And when you are done satisfying me, I'm out. Christians enter in it and say, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, I'm not going anywhere. And I will love you if you don't love me back. I will care for you even on your worst day. And when they see that kind of love, they see something beautiful, and it becomes easy to say to them, this is the kind of love God has for his children. He comes to us even in our worst moment, loves us in a way we don't deserve, to make us who we're meant to be under God. That's what Jesus did for us. That's our gospel. And that's what our marriages get to be a picture of. And ladies, it is beautiful to submit to a man who will love you like that. And just to take it outside the marriage sphere, Band of Brothers. Incredible TV series based on an incredible book, based on an incredible real-life account of the 101st Airborne Division in World War II. Group of men fighting a fierce war. And there was a moment for those men when they had to take the city of Foy, and they had been put under a lieutenant named Lieutenant Dyke. Lieutenant Dyke was a guy that had come from luxury and ease. He became lieutenant because he was just trying to move himself up the ranks to get the highest rank possible for his own benefit. And so when he came in and was over the 101st, it was obvious to them that he couldn't care less about them. And so as he entered in to lead them, as they were out on the front lines, he would routinely disappear on walks for hours at a time, just go away. He wasn't out there encouraging them, wasn't out there speaking life to them, wasn't out there seeing what resources they need, wasn't out there initiating to help them at all. When it came time to lead them into Foy, into the battle, there was a clear battle strategy to move them forward. And in the middle of that strategy, he freaked out and had them all hunker down at the most dangerous place possible and basically folded like a lawn chair. Just was so concerned for his personal safety, he was willing to put the entire regiment in jeopardy. Right? A selfish man leading is deadly for the follower. In that moment in frustration, their commanding officer relieved him of duty and sent in a new lieutenant, Lieutenant Spears. Lieutenant Spears saw those men in jeopardy. And do you know what he did? He came sprinting towards them. And men who saw him do it said, I remember the Germans were firing their 88s at him. That's the biggest guns they have. And they said, we were impressed by that. That's anti-tank kind of guns. And they're firing them at this lone man sprinting across the field, coming to these men in aid, and he's dodging these massive bullets. And they were like, that's impressive. And he ran up to them and moved Dyke out of the way and began to give them orders of how they were going to move into the city. They had broken communications with other men of theirs on the other side of the city in a dangerous place. And so he realized, I got some men here and some men there, and they're in danger. So without hesitation, Spears stood up and ran through enemy lines to connect with the guys on the other side of the city, physically running past Germans on his way to get these guys. And they said it confused them because they were like, did he just, wow. It says they didn't even shoot at him, they were just confused. And they said the most impressive thing was he ran to get these guys and get their comms back up. And when he did, they said the most impressive thing was he ran back through the German lines again as they fired at him to reconnect with us and to lead us into the city. And they said, we sat there and watched this man sprinting towards us, initiating, coming to our aid. And when he saw what we needed, risking his life without hesitation to give us what we need to win at the mission we've been called to, they said, we rejoiced to follow a man like that. And that's the kind of husband you want. That's the kind of man you're called to be, that I will initiate and sacrifice for the person that's called to follow me. And if you're not ready to do that, if you're a selfish guy, don't get married. If the guy you're with is not willing to do that or hasn't demonstrated that, don't marry him. You want a guy that's going to follow the Lord and wants to look like the Lord, right? And you see him in relationships. Does he initiate? Does he sacrifice? Are the people around him better and more godly as a result of his influence? Or does he just kind of have some dudes he hangs with? You watch him. And you watch her. Is she responsive and affirming? Does she breathe life into the people around her? That's who you want to be around. Is she nitpicky and demeaning and demoralizing and discouraging? You be careful binding to that. But man, let me tell you something. When you get someone who is willing to initiate and sacrifice, they're a joy to follow. That's the kind of man you want, ladies. And for those of you who don't know, that's what the Son of God did for us. When we were lost and dead in our sin, the Son of God, Jesus Christ, initiated. Now this is love, that he came for us. He came and he sacrificed on the cross to take our sin away, that he might remove not just your sin, but every single spot, every single wrinkle, every single blemish, so that you will be a pure, spotless, beautiful bride before God. That when Jesus Christ is done with those who have put their faith in him, we will be pure. No more regret, no more pain, no more sadness, no more frustration and struggle with that besetting sin. Jesus is going to work on those things to get them all out of the way, so that at the end of our days, all we have left is holiness and purity with him. That's what our God's doing for us. He's a joy to follow. And so if you're in this space and you're not a Christian, let me tell you something. There's no greater joy in life than to bind yourself in covenant relationship with Jesus Christ and to take his name, to be a Christian. He's a leader that initiated and sacrificed for his people that we might be fully alive under God. I would beg you to know him.
Howdy, and welcome to the Breakaway podcast. My name is Brent, and I'm sitting here with Ben Stuart. And tonight we were continuing in our Ephesians series, and we covered Ephesians 5, 22 through 33, Ben, on marriage.
Marriage.
You could tell the students were a little giddy tonight.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I was too focused on how fast can I get as much in as I can, you know?
Yeah.
How do you cover the entire topic of marriage in one talk? You don't.
No.
You just pick some things, you know?
You picked some great things, though.
Sure. There's some Bible.
And that's why we have this.
There's some Bible in there. Yeah.
We're going to cover some more. So
Yes, we are.
It was a great night with Jeff Johnson, and we're really coming into the home stretch. Y'all can pray for us. We've got 3 breakaways that we're going to cover in 8 days. We just finished one. We've got Parents Weekend coming up, which we'll talk about a little bit more after we cover a little bit more about marriage. But and then we'll do another one on Tuesday. So.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. This is a fun season. 5 breakaways left, and 3 of them will burn through in 8 days. It's pretty crazy, but it's been a great spring, and it's been fun to move into the book of Ephesians. And, it's like so many times I sit here and go, gosh, do you re-preach it? I mean, literally in seminary, I wrote a 30-page paper on these 11 verses, So, I just have a normal sermon for me is about 4 pages. So we just sort of scratched the surface of all this. And I don't know how deep, I'm not going to sit here and go on for hours, although it would be worthwhile. Let me just throw some resources at you. If you're like, Ben, I really want to dive in deep on this. Let me just laundry list some, and you tell me what interests you. And then maybe we'll touch down on 1 or 2 things in the text. But if you really want to go deeper in the book of Ephesians, if you're like, what is the Greek of that word and that sort of thing? Harold Hoehner has a 1,000-page commentary on Ephesians. Now think about that. Ephesians is like less than 6 pages, and the man wrote 1,000. And so it gets in deep, and it's a wonderful commentary. I love it. So Harold Hoehner, you can read his commentary on Ephesians. Peter O'Brien wrote a commentary on Ephesians as well for the Pillar New Testament commentary series. That is a great one as well. Those are sort of my 2 baseline ones. There's a lot of great commentaries on Ephesians. Those 2 are excellent. Highly recommend them. In the world of men and women and male headship and how do these roles relate, I mentioned Wayne Grudem and John Piper. They put together a book that's just a collection of essays and papers on recovering biblical manhood. And they have the Council for Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. You can go to their website. I think on John Piper's Desiring God, you can download that big, thick, Recovering Biblical Manhood and Womanhood book for free. It's huge. And he's got a littler book too called, I think, What's the Difference? About the difference between men and women. It's presenting a position that some people call complementarianism, that men and women are different and complement one another. Their differences complement each other. I think that's the biblical view, personally. That's what I was presenting here. Some people will move into this text and they say, verse 21 says, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. So it's mutual submission. And then they say the husband is the head of the wife. That word head could mean source. because Adam came first. So there's really nothing in here about male authority. But you really have to do some violence to the text to say that. I mean, notwithstanding that it's debatable that the word head ever means source anywhere. Or you just read contextually about how the church submits to Christ, so wives should submit to their husbands. It's hard to read that and go, oh, there's nothing about role distinctions in here. You're like, no, there are. But I think it's important to note, I obviously don't know experientially, but I resonate deeply with, there's a lot of women that when they hear texts like this, they're afraid of chauvinism, of men that want to use the power of men to dominate or use women. And the Bible is categorically against that. God sides with the weak and the hurt and the exploited. God is angry at the proud. God does not affirm and celebrate chauvinism at all. God affirms what we hammered here, and that is a man who would use his power to love, use his power to care. And so that's really what I wanted to emphasize in this talk. If you're afraid of the word submission, it's coming under the leadership of somebody. We all come under the leader of somebody. We're all a part of a government. We all work at jobs. Everybody comes under a leader. Whether it's a pleasant experience or difficult one is entirely dependent upon who's the leader, you know? And have I come underneath one that is aiming to help me flourish, you know? And that's the kind of leader you want to follow. That's why I referenced my first job was like that. That's what I strive to be as a boss. For me at the office is I don't think I micromanage or tell people how to do every little thing. That's insecure leadership. Good leadership is I'm trying to set everybody up to win, that we all win together at this common mission we've signed up on. And that's what a good husband does. How do I create an environment here at the home where my wife wins, where my kids win, where everybody's being who they need to be under God? That's good leadership from a man. And I believe this text pretty clearly presents that. So that would help. And then in terms of popular level literature, I don't read a lot of it, but I know the Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts was a book so many people have loved. I know the Love and Respect is another book that has been very popular.
Yeah, it's one my wife and I are going through right now.
Yeah.
And we are newlyweds, so it's great.
And you like it? It's been
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's built off, that title, Love and Respect, is built off this Ephesians passage. That's the summary we didn't get to, but in verse 33, as he's wrapping up, Paul gets excited and starts talking about how Christ loves the church. He's bound himself to the church. And then he comes around at the end and says, however, and then sort of summarizes, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. And one thing that book points out that Shaunti Feldham does too in her books, What a Man Wants, What a Woman Wants, those are good books. There's a number of sort of these surveys that have looked at that. When you ask a man, what's their deepest felt need? It's to feel respected, to feel honored. And what's a woman's deepest felt need? It's to feel cherished and loved. And so it's interesting that when Paul writes this, he tells women, respect their husbands, and tells men to love their wives, because that's how to do what most breathes the life into the other person. We tend to sort of aim at doing the things that we want done to us. It's different to go, no, what most breathes life into you. And for women, it's that sense of being cherished and valued, of loved. And for men, it's to be respected and honored, And where a man feels disrespected, he'll either get angry or disengage. And where a wife feels unloved, it will breed disrespect. You dislike that person that'll do that. And so it can become a crazy, unhelpful cycle of disrespect and lack of love, or it can be this wonderful cycle of feeling valued and affirmed, feeling cherished and loved, and that can be a wonderful thing. And I didn't get in deep on all that, but I know for me, maybe I'll use a personal illustration and then we'll stop kind of moving through all the text. But, for me, I remember as Donna was getting to know me and I'm trying to articulate myself, one of my greatest, strongest emotional reactions is when I saw women undermine or mock the guys they were dating or married to in social circles. For me, I just thought, that is the worst possible thing you can do. Like, you're the closest person into this guy. Like, he's vulnerable to you. And you're taking personal, private, vulnerable information and using it to make fun of him in front of other people. You're like, what recourse have you given him? Is he going to make fun of you back? That's horribly inappropriate. What's he going to do? You just have to sit there and take it. It's very emasculating to disrespect somebody. And so I just remember, and Donna saw that about me. Boy, I really dislike that. Even if it's not me, just watching someone do it to somebody else. And then even at seminary, I would come home from classes, and if there was a student that was disrespectful to the professor, she would just ask the question, how was school? And I'm like, this one monkey, and I would just be so fired up. Like, it's wrong to dishonor people.
I agree, yeah.
And Donna realized, oh, that means a lot to Ben. And I realized that, gosh, that does mean a lot to me. And so one thing I've loved about Donna is she doesn't mock me. And then I've had to see for Donna, what are the things that make her feel loved and cherished? And I am a student of Donna to go, what makes her feel loved? Quality time with her makes her feel loved. I want to make sure I initiate creating that space. So do women need to be respected? Absolutely. Do men need to be loved? Absolutely. These aren't rigid categories. And yet, in the world of felt needs, I think men do feel that they want to be respected. And I think women feel very deeply they want to be cherished. And I think if we can know that about each other and give that to each other, we create a space where everybody wins. And that's what Paul's advocating. This picture in Ephesians 5 is beautiful when lived out.
Yeah, I agree. And it's so interesting being married, going on 6 months here in a couple of days, to come at it from that angle and that other side of being married, and to know that I fight to give her unconditional love and she fights to give me unconditional respect. And we want to stay off that crazy cycle like you mentioned. So,
So good, man.
Well, thanks for listening. We hinted at the beginning, we have Parents Week in Breakaway this Saturday. So if you're coming in to visit a student, if you'll be in College Station, come see us, Reed Arena on Saturday, 9:00. It's a little bit more available to some working people because they could sleep in on Sunday or something. So we invite everyone. We don't check parents at the door. So if you're a student and just want to come, please join us. But definitely, if your parents are in town, bring them to Reed Arena, get them some coffee. We'll do our best to energize the moment. And it's really turned into a sweet time for a lot of families over these past couple of years. And so we believe in it, and we're going to keep doing it. And just want you to know that you're invited if you're in town.
Yeah, we have people all the time that say, man, I'd love to come to Breakaway, but a Tuesday night driving in from some other town on a work day is brutal. And you go, well, here's your one shot on a Saturday. So if you've always thought you want to come to one and a weekday's too hard, Parents Weekend this Saturday, April 12th.
That's right.
Come on.
Well, thanks for listening. We hope this was helpful, and we count it a privilege to get to do this, and we hope you leave encouraged. Thanks.
See ya.